Ardennes, December 1944. 4 in the morning and far below freezing. One man is already awake, coaxing a fire to life in the dark. His first worry is not the food, it is the smoke. To the German gunners across the valley, a column of smoke is an address. He is not a rifleman. He will take no ground today. He is a cook. And the hot meal he sends up to the line will do something to this battle that no rifle in his company can do. When the war is remembered, his name will not be in it. The men who won the war in the West are not the ones I want to talk about tonight. Not the generals, not the tanks with famous names. I want to talk about the man with the ladle. He stood over an open flame, inside the range of German guns, so that other men could eat something hot before they went forward. He wore no rank that anyone saluted. He earned no medal that anyone remembers. And when the histories were written, his name was left out of almost every one of them. His own country never thought to thank him. But the hot food he sent up the line became one of the quiet reasons the war in the West ended the way it did. By the winter of 1944, the German army had begun to understand something that no order could fix and no speech could undo. They were not just being outshot, they were being outfed. And to a cold, hungry man in a hole in the ground, a hot meal arriving on time every day said something more final than any artillery barrage. It said, "You are fighting a country that can do this and still have enough left over to win." This is the story of the American field kitchen, the system that carried coffee into hell, and the forgotten men who ran it. To understand what that soldier smelled, you have to understand the two armies as they really moved. We picture the German war machine as exactly that, a machine. Steel, engines, gray precision. The truth, by 1944, was closer to something out of the century before. The German army never stopped depending on the horse. At the end of December 1944, the Wehrmacht still had roughly 930,000 horses on its books. Across the whole war, it used something on the order of 3 million. Guns were pulled by animals, supply came forward by animals, and when the fuel ran short, and by 1944 it always ran short, the horse was not a backup, it was the plan. And a shortage in one place did not stay in one place. When the fuel ran low, the trucks stopped. When the trucks stopped, the shells and the food fell behind the guns. And a gun is only as useful as what reaches it. It cascaded all the way down. By the last winter of the war, whole German formations were barely being supplied from the rear at all. They were living off whatever they could find in front of them, captured depots, empty villages, the countryside. When their final gamble came, in the Ardennes, the picture turned almost cruel. Columns of horses jammed against the few motorized units on the same iced-over roads, and the supply that was meant to race forward instead crawled and stalled and reached the men late, or never at all. An army that cannot feed its own attack has already lost it. They just had not been told yet. Now put the two supply lines side by side. On one side, a column of tired horses hauling cold rations over a frozen road, tangled up with the few trucks that still had fuel, falling further behind the men every day. On the other, a fleet of trucks running day and night, the kind of system that could move more than 1,000 tons of a single item across an ocean just so soldiers could have one particular dinner. We'll get to that dinner. One army was trying to keep men alive. The other had moved on to a harder question. How do you keep men whole? Not just fed. Warm and human, close enough to the fighting that a hot cup could reach them before it went cold. The Germans were losing the argument of supply. And the strange thing, the thing their own letters admit, is that they could smell themselves losing it. The American answer to feeding men in the field was not a single ration. It was a whole family of them, each engineered for a different kind of hell. There was the A ration, fresh food, refrigerated, cooked in a real kitchen, the one every soldier wanted. There was the B ration, canned and packaged, cooked in field kitchens with no refrigeration at all, built on a menu that could run for 15 days without repeating and still put nearly 4,000 calories in a man. Then the ones the fighting men actually carried, the C ration, a full pre-cooked meal in a can, eaten hot if you had the time and cold if you didn't. The K ration, the little box a man could stuff in a jacket, meant for 2 or 3 days at most, for paratroopers and tank crews and men on the move. And the D ration, the emergency bar, dense chocolate built for calories, not pleasure, so a starving man wouldn't burn through it early. And holding it together, the ration that reads like an accountant's poem, the 10 in 1, one package that fed 10 men for a day, or 1 man for 10, built so a small unit with a field kitchen could eat like a group, not like 10 lonely individuals opening 10 lonely cans. None of that was an accident. This was a country that had looked at the oldest problem in war, hungry men far from home, and answered it the way it answered everything else in those years, with a system, with doctrine, with the flat, stubborn belief that a soldier who got a hot meal would fight, and a soldier who didn't might not. And they built the whole pipeline to defend that one belief. Behind the fighting, the American supply effort in Europe had swollen into something almost impossible to hold in the mind at once. It had grown so large that its central problem by 1944 was no longer scarcity at all. It was abundance. The difficulty was no longer finding enough, it was managing the flood of it, and steering that flood down to the right few hundred yards of freezing mud where a particular company happened to be dug in. Trucks ran the rations forward around the clock. The long supply lines ran day and night to keep both the guns and the kitchens fed. Routes like the Red Ball Express that had hauled fuel and rations across France that autumn. Bread was baked behind the lines and carried up toward the front while it was still worth eating. Coffee, sugar, canned meat, flour, all of it flowing forward on a schedule, in weather that was killing men, into range of an enemy trying to cut every road it touched. And the closer that river of supply got to the front, the more dangerous the last few hundred yards became, which is exactly where the men we have never bothered to name were standing. The men behind that belief wore the insignia of the Quartermaster Corps, and most of them will never appear in a film about this war. If somewhere in your family there was a man who wore that quartermaster insignia, a cook, a baker, a truck driver, a supply clerk, keep him in your mind as we go. I'm going to ask about him before the end. These are the men this channel exists to name. Here is what the histories skip. Cooking at the front was not safe work behind the safe lines. A field kitchen makes smoke, and smoke, to enemy artillery, is an address. So the cooks learned. They tied tarpaulins over their fires to break up the smoke. They kept the chow line down to 5 or 6 men at a time because a crowd of hungry soldiers standing in the open was a target, and everyone knew it. They fed men Spam 100 different ways because Spam was what there was: cubed, sliced, fried, hidden in potatoes, beaten into batter. Anything to make the same meat feel like a different meal. One more day. It sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. By every account from those front lines, 2 things brought a worn-down soldier back to himself faster than anything else: hot food and word from home, a letter and a hot meal. Picture the actual work, hour by hour. Before first light, in the cold, a man coaxes a fire to life and then spends his attention keeping its smoke from becoming an address for enemy guns. He heats water he hauled himself. He opens the cans, stretches the meat, works the line, 5 or 6 men, then a pause, then 5 or 6 more. Because a bunched-up crowd of hungry soldiers standing in the open is the simplest target on the whole field, and he knows it, and they know it. He does all of this inside the range of the same artillery everyone else is trying to survive. Except he cannot take cover, because a cook who hides is a company that does not eat. And when the shelling does come, the food still has to move, carried forward from the kitchens in insulated containers so the riflemen in the holes could have something warm before the next thing happened. Quiet, constant, unarmed against the one thing that could kill him, and almost entirely unrecorded. The man who cooked that meal stood in the cold and the danger to make it, and then watched the riflemen walk away to be the ones remembered. One of them was a cook named Angelo Giapponi. He served with the 77th Infantry Division, not here in Europe but on the other side of the world, in the Pacific. Guam, Leyte, Okinawa. A different war entirely and the same forgotten job. And in whatever hours he had, he painted. Small scenes of the ordinary life of soldiers, the waiting, the eating, the boredom between terrors. Those paintings survive. They are one of the few honest records we have of the cook's war, made by a cook, because almost no one else thought it was worth recording. Now multiply him. Every division, every company, every field kitchen had one. Thousands of men who got up in the dark, kept a fire from betraying a position, and fed other men so those other men could go forward and be remembered. Almost none of them left a painting or a diary or a single line in a history book. They did the work, and the work erased them. That is the strange price of being the man who keeps everyone else alive. You become the part of the story nobody thinks to tell. Think about what that means. We have shelves of books about the men who fired the guns. We have a handful of paintings from a man who fed them, and we have those only because he happened to be an artist. Everyone else with a ladle disappeared into the word support. It is a strange, flattening word, support. It turns thousands of individual men into a category, a footnote, a line in a supply table. The rifleman gets a name and a story. The man who kept him fed gets an abstraction. And yet without that abstraction, the named men could not have moved a single mile. An army marches on its stomach. The line is old enough to be a cliché and true enough to have helped decide this war. Every yard of ground taken in the West was taken by men who had been fed that morning by someone whose name is gone now. We kept the ground. We lost the cook. So far this has been the story of one tired man and a fire. Now it gets larger. What that cook carried forward was not only breakfast, it was a message. And the people who read that message most clearly were not the Americans who ate it. They were the Germans, freezing in the tree line, who could see exactly what it meant. By late 1944, German soldiers were overrunning American positions and finding them stocked like another world. Ice cream in more than one flavor, Coca-Cola, meat, fruit, chocolate, often better than what the German army was feeding its own frontline troops. There are accounts of German soldiers during the Battle of the Bulge falling ill from the American rations they captured, simply because their bodies were no longer used to food that rich. This was not mercy shown to them. It was a supply report, written in food, and the numbers in it were terrifying. Sit with the picture. A soldier who has been eating cold bread and thin soup, who has been told his own side is the one meant to outlast the enemy. That soldier opens an American supply dump in the snow and finds ice cream. Picture what that does to a man. He has told himself the enemy must be suffering too, because that belief is the thing that lets him keep going. Then he finds it. Not rumor, not propaganda, ice cream, in the snow, in a war. A man can steady himself against enemy guns, guns he expected. What he cannot steady himself against is the quiet arithmetic of a country that can spare this, here, while his own side is running out of bread. And the ice cream was not luck, it was policy. By February 1945, the American Army was building facilities specifically to bring ice cream in half-pint cartons right up toward the foxholes. Coca-Cola followed the troops because a general asked for it. 10 portable bottling plants, requested by cable in 1943, grew into 64 plants and more than 5 billion bottles before the war was over. Think about what a bottle of Coca-Cola actually was out there. It was not the drink. It was the message printed invisibly on the glass. It said, "The country that sent me is not rationing its comforts down to nothing. It is not scraping." It built 64 bottling plants and shipped them across an ocean chasing an army, because somebody decided the men should have this small taste of home, and could afford to decide it. Every bottle that reached the front was a quiet, fizzing proof of a depth of resources the other side did not have and could no longer pretend to. You do not outsuffer an enemy like that, and the German soldier holding a captured bottle in the snow understood the message perfectly, even if no one ever said it to him out loud. And then there was the turkey. Thanksgiving, 1944. A single ship, the Great Republic, sailed from New York carrying 1,600 tons of frozen turkey. It reached France in November, enough for something like 1 million meals. Nearly every one of the 2 million American soldiers in Europe got a real Thanksgiving dinner that year. Turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce. Stop and let the scale of that land. A nation at war, fighting across an entire continent, made a deliberate decision that its soldiers would eat turkey on a particular Thursday in November, and then moved 1,600 tons of frozen bird across a submarine-hunted ocean to keep the promise. Not because turkey wins battles, because a hot holiday meal, arriving on time, thousands of miles from home, tells a man he has not been forgotten. It tells him the enormous machine behind him still knows he exists, right down to what is on his plate. That is a strange and powerful thing to hand a frightened man. And it is the kind of thing only a certain kind of country, in a certain kind of position, can even attempt. Some of it went all the way forward. There is an account of a carrying party reaching a frontline command post with the whole dinner, turkey, gravy, cigars, arriving at the exact moment a German barrage came down on the hill and the wounded were being carried out. Men ate Thanksgiving dinner in the sound of that. A month later, at Christmas, with the Bulge still raging some 30 miles north, an American officer wrote home that everyone got turkey, and some men even had baked pie and cake, the units rotating through their positions so that every man could come back and eat. Hold those 2 Christmases side by side because the whole war is in the gap between them. On one side of the line, men rotating back a few at a time out of the freezing dark to eat turkey and pie because the system behind them was strong enough to send turkey and pie into a battle. On the other side, an army whose own supply had broken down so badly that its soldiers were falling ill from the richness of the American food they captured, their bodies no longer used to eating that well. That is not a difference in courage. The German soldier that winter was, by every account, as brave and as stubborn as any man in the field. It is a difference in what stood behind him. And by Christmas of 1944, what stood behind him was a line of tired horses and an empty road. He knew it, and the men across from him, eating pie, knew it too. Let me be honest with you about this word, weapon, because it matters. No German officer left us a neat sentence calling the American field kitchen a weapon. If anyone ever tells you those exact words were spoken, Ask them for the source, because there isn't one. That is not how the truth of this works. The truth is quieter and heavier. It is written across their own letters and memoirs, and it says one thing without ever using the word. The Americans fought a war of plenty, and the Emperor knew it, and, knowing it, did something to them. Rommel, who understood supply better than most men alive, said the battle is decided by the quartermasters before the shooting begins. He meant it as a hard lesson from the desert. On the Western Front, it read like a prophecy coming true. And when it was over, the German commander who had watched the last great offensive in the Ardennes fail said the idea itself was almost a stroke of genius, but that all the conditions needed to make it work were lacking. Completely inadequate forces, he said, on the ground and in the air. And behind that stood the thing he did not have to spell out: the fuel, the supply, everything the plan quietly depended on. His men had not run out of courage. They had run out of everything that keeps courage standing. We should be careful here because it would be easy to turn this into a comfortable story. The rich side beat the poor side, and that was that. The record says something more unsettling. The German soldier was not simply outnumbered by cans. He was beaten, in part, inside his own head, by what those cans told him about the war he was in. A hungry man can convince himself the enemy is suffering too. That belief is a kind of armor. It lets him keep going one more day. Take it away. Show him, in the snow, in the smell on the wind, in the ice cream sitting in a captured dump, that the enemy is not suffering, is not scraping, is not close to breaking, and something quietly gives way. It is not his courage that goes first. It is his hope. And an army can survive the loss of almost anything longer than it can survive the loss of that. That is the whole point. A hot meal at the front is not just food. It is proof. Proof that the machine behind the soldier is working, that thousands of miles of ocean and road and rail are all still turning, all the way down to the coffee in his cup. When that proof arrives every single day, it tells your enemy a truth that no speech can untell. We cannot outlast these people. They are not tired. They are not breaking. They brought us ice cream in a snowstorm, and they still have more men and more shells than we do. That is what the German soldier in the tree line was really looking at when he opened that dump in the snow. Not just good food. Something worse for him. He was looking at how the war was going to end. Nobody built a monument to a cook, the man who tied a tarp over his fire so the smoke wouldn't bring the shells. He went home, and he took off the uniform, and for the rest of his life, if anyone asked what he did in the war, he had to decide whether "I cooked" was even worth saying out loud. The truck drivers who ran the rations forward, the bakers, the supply clerks who counted the cans so that 10 men could eat instead of 1. They were folded into a single gray word: support. And support does not get parades. But they were there, in the cold, in range, every day, not to take a life, to keep one going. And when it was over, they went home and folded quietly back into the country they had fed. And that country mostly forgot they had been there at all. We remember the men who fired the guns. We built libraries for them, and we were right to. We have almost nothing for the man who made sure they had the strength to lift the gun in the first place. A handful of paintings from a cook who happened to pick up a brush, and a single gray word: support, that hides far more than it says. Maybe it's time we remembered him too. So this is for the man with the ladle, for the baker at 3 in the morning, for the driver who kept the coffee coming up a road with his name on none of it. The war remembered the men who took ground. It forgot the men who made sure those men had the strength to take it. We're not going to forget them here. If someone in your family served, and especially if he served the way these men did, in the Quartermaster Corps, as a cook, a baker, a driver, a supply man, leave his name below, just his name, and where he served if you know it. I read every one of them, and every name left in that space is one more of these quiet men pulled back out of that gray word and remembered out loud. There is another name this war tried to lose, and when you are ready, it is waiting for you right here.